There is a particular kind of grief that arrives not with a crash, but with the quiet click of a door closing. Thomas had replayed that company party 1,000 times in the months that followed. Not the argument outside, not even the drive away, but a single image. Angela tilting her head back to laugh at something Victor said, her whole body turned toward him the way a plant turns toward a window. Thomas had watched her and thought, she used to turn toward me like that. He didn't know, standing in the parking lot with his car keys already in his hand, that he had been grieving his marriage for 2 years before he finally let himself admit it. This is the story of Thomas Elliott Carver and his wife Angela Renee Carver. They had been married for 7 years when things began to quietly come apart. Not with a rupture, not with cruelty, but with the slow accumulation of small absences. Thomas was the kind of man who believed that love was demonstrated through steadiness. He paid bills on time, came home every evening, said I love you, before sleep with the reliability of a habit. Angela was the kind of woman who needed to feel that love had weight, that it arrived with intention rather than routine. For years, they had managed the gap between these two natures without either of them fully naming it. The trouble was that unspoken distances do not stay still. They grow, and by the time Thomas finally spoke, standing outside a glittering company party with the autumn cold pressing in around him, the distance had already become a geography neither of them knew how to cross. Their apartment on Crestfield Avenue was the kind of place that looked like a life well assembled. Bookshelves, organized by subject. A coffee maker, with a timer set to 6:45. Two toothbrushes in a ceramic cup, side by side, touching at the handles. Thomas was a structural engineer for a regional firm. His days had a particular texture, blueprints, load calculations, the satisfying certainty of numbers that held. He left the apartment every morning at 7:20, kissed Angela on the cheek if she was awake, on the temple if she wasn't. He had been doing this for so long that the kiss had become something close to punctuation. The period at the end of a sentence, neither of them was fully reading anymore. Angela worked in communications for Alderton and Reed, a mid-sized consulting firm with an open floor plan and a culture that rewarded personality as much as competence. She was good at her job in the way that some people are good at a language they were born speaking. Naturally, without visible effort. She organized. She persuaded. She made rooms feel easier. At home, these same qualities sometimes felt like energy with nowhere particular to go. They still ate dinner together most nights. Angela would set the table, Thomas would pour the water, and they would sit across from each other and talk about their days in the practiced way of people who have learned to fill silence companionably. The conversations were pleasant. They were also, in retrospect, almost entirely impersonal. They discussed logistics, grocery lists, a leaking bathroom faucet, whether Thomas's sister would expect them at Christmas. They discussed the news, colleagues, a documentary Angela had half-watched. What they did not discuss, with any real honesty, was each other. It was at an Alderton and Reed summer gathering, a rooftop thing, casual and crowded, that Thomas first noticed Victor Hale. Victor worked in strategy. He was not especially handsome in any obvious way, but he carried himself with the particular ease of someone comfortable being the most interesting person in a room. He had opinions that he delivered lightly, as though he held them loosely and could let them go. Thomas had watched Angela laugh at something Victor said that evening and felt a small, involuntary contraction somewhere in his chest. He didn't examine it. He got himself another drink and talked to Angela's colleague Diane for 20 minutes about the architecture of office renovations. On the drive home that night, Angela had said, still lightly flushed from the rooftop air, "Victor's actually really funny. I didn't expect that from him." Thomas had said, "M." And then, because he was a man who distrusted his own intuitions when they arrived dressed as jealousy, "That's good. Work is easier when you like the people." Angela had nodded and looked out the passenger window at the passing streetlights. That was the first moment, the one that would rearrange itself in memory, acquiring weight it hadn't seemed to carry at the time. In the months that followed, Victor's name appeared in Angela's conversation with the reliable frequency of someone who had become part of the daily texture of her working life. Victor thinks the restructuring is going to go badly. Victor brought in baklava from that place on Commerce Street. Victor got the Harmon account, which nobody expected. Thomas listened. He responded appropriately. He did not say, "You say his name more than you say mine." He was not sure then that he had even consciously registered it. Where he did register, quietly, the way you register a draft before you identify the open window, was that Angela seemed more animated when she had something Victor related to report. Not giddy, not obvious, simply more present in a way that she wasn't always present when the conversation was about him. One Sunday in October, he came into the kitchen to find her laughing at her phone, her whole face open and delighted. "What?" he asked. She looked up. The openness retreated slightly, not with guilt, but with the reflex of someone returning from somewhere private. "Nothing, sorry." Victor sent something ridiculous. She turned the phone to show him a meme about corporate jargon. It was mildly funny. Thomas smiled. "Good one," he said. He poured his coffee and took it to the table. He sat with the paper and did not read a word of it for 4 minutes. November brought the kind of cold that settles into apartments, no matter how well the windows are sealed. Thomas started getting up earlier than usual, pulling on his coat in the half-dark, letting the click of the front door serve as his goodbye on the mornings Angela slept past 7. She didn't always notice, or if she did, she didn't say. Their evenings had acquired a new texture, not hostile, not even uncomfortable, simply quieter than before. Angela would spend part of the evening on her laptop at the kitchen table. Thomas would read or watch something on the television with the volume low. They would share the hours without quite sharing them. It had the appearance of companionship and the feeling of something else. He noticed things he hadn't consciously catalogued before. The way Angela almost never initiated physical contact anymore, not aggressively absent, just gradually reduced. The way a dial is turned by degrees until you realize the room has gone cold. The way she talked about work with specific energy and then seemed to arise back into their apartment as if lowering a volume. He found himself looking for evidence of something he hadn't named and didn't want to name. What he found instead, and perhaps this was worse, was simply absence of evidence. Angela was not secretive. Her phone was not guarded. She came home when she said she would. She was pleasant, warm even, in a general way. There was nothing he could point to. There was only a feeling, and Thomas had always been suspicious of feelings that arrived without data. In December, Alderton and Reed hosted their annual holiday party at the Meridian Hotel downtown. Angela had mentioned it 3 times in the week leading up to it, which restaurant she'd heard was catering, what she was planning to wear, whether Thomas thought the charcoal blazer or the navy one. Thomas noticed that she mentioned Victor would be there, the way you mention weather, matter-of-factly, as though it were simply geographical information. He wore the navy blazer. She looked at him when he came out of the bedroom and said, "Good choice," and kissed him once, on the cheek, quickly. Her perfume was the one she'd bought herself for her birthday. The hotel was warm and loud and glittering with the particular excess of corporate celebrations. Thomas knew a handful of Angela's colleagues by face, if not by name. He got drinks for both of them and stood beside her as she moved to the room, making introductions, touching arms, laughing in the easy way she had always had in social spaces. He had loved this quality in her once, her fluency in rooms. Now he watched it, and felt, obscurely, that he was watching it from outside. Victor appeared sometime after the first hour. He was taller than Thomas remembered. He greeted Angela with a hug that lasted 2 seconds longer than a professional hug, and Angela's hand remained briefly on his arm after she stepped back. It was not scandalous. It was the kind of contact that happens between people who like each other and are not thinking about being watched. Thomas was thinking about it. They moved into a cluster of colleagues. Thomas held his drink and participated at the edges of conversation, laughing at the right moments, asking 1 or 2 questions, while also conducting a quiet, involuntary audit of everything he was seeing. The way Angela's attention kept returning to Victor like a compass needle. The way she looked at him when he was speaking to someone else. Not with longing exactly, with something more ordinary, and therefore more devastating, familiarity. He thought, "She is comfortable with him in a way she has not been comfortable with me in a long time." He went to the bar for another drink he didn't particularly want. The bartender, a young woman with tired eyes, asked if he was having a good time. "Fine," Thomas said. "Thank you." Standing there, glass in hand, watching the room, he understood something he had been carefully not understanding for months. He was not afraid that Angela was having an affair. He was afraid that she was having something harder to argue with, a friendship that had filled a space he had stopped filling himself. And the worst part, The part he couldn't quite look at directly was the awareness that he did not entirely know when he had stopped. He went back to her side. He smiled. He lasted another 40 minutes before he said, quietly, that he needed some air, and he meant it. The Meridian Hotel had a side entrance that opened onto a narrow courtyard, mostly decorative, with a few iron benches and a row of bare trees strung with white lights. Thomas sat on one of the benches and breathed the cold air until it stopped feeling like a strategy. He didn't know how long he'd been sitting there before the door opened and Angela stepped out, her good coat pulled around her, a slight furrow of concern on her forehead. "I saw you slip out," she said. She sat beside him without asking permission, the way you sit beside someone you are married to. "Are you all right?" "I'm not sure," Thomas said. Angela looked at him. She waited. She had always been good at waiting. It was one of the things he had loved about her. This capacity to let a silence exist without rushing to fill it. Lately, the silences had started to feel like evidence. "Victor," he said, because there was no graceful way to approach it, and he had been approaching it gracefully, in his own head, for months. Angela's expression didn't change dramatically. A small shift, wariness, not guilt. "What about him?" "I watch you with him," Thomas said. He was choosing his words with the same care he brought to structural calculations, aware that imprecision could cause collapse. "You're different. Or maybe you're more yourself. I don't know, I haven't worked out which is worse." A long pause. Angela looked at the white lights on the bare branches. "We get along well," she said finally. "We work together." "I know that." "Thomas, I'm not accusing you of anything," he said. And then, because the sentence that followed had been forming itself in his chest for weeks, waiting for the precise conditions to emerge, "It's him or our marriage." He said it quietly. He said it the way you state a structural finding, not to wound, but because the integrity of the load-bearing element has been compromised and there is no responsible way to pretend otherwise. Angela was quiet for a moment. Then she made a sound that was close to a laugh. Not cruel, not dismissive, but the involuntary exhale of someone who has heard something they've classified as an exaggeration. "You're not serious," she said. Thomas looked at her. He did not smile. "You are," she said, the amusement still in her voice but with something uncertain underneath it now. "Thomas, Victor and I are friends, colleagues. You're... This isn't... I'm not asking you to agree with me," Thomas said. "I'm telling you where I am." Angela stood. She pulled her coat tighter. There was something almost relieved in her face. The face of a person who has decided that the most manageable interpretation of an uncomfortable thing is that it is not quite real. "Come back inside," she said. "You're cold and let's just go back inside and talk about this at home." She went in. The door closed. Thomas sat for another few minutes on the iron bench, looking at the white lights. Then he stood, walked to the valet stand, retrieved his car, and drove home. He moved with the methodical deliberateness of a man who has made a decision he is not going to revisit. He packed a bag, not hurriedly, not angrily, but with the quiet focus of someone completing a necessary task. He took his shaving kit, his laptop, 4 days of clothes, the novel he'd been reading. He left nothing dramatic. No note positioned for maximum emotional impact. Only an absence, which he suspected would say everything a note could not. He was at his friend Gerald's apartment by 10 o'clock. Gerald, to his considerable credit, asked only one question: "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet," Thomas said. "Okay," Gerald said, and put on a film neither of them particularly watched. Angela called at 11:47 that night, then at 12:15, then with a longer interval, at 1:40. Thomas watched the phone illuminate and go dark, and then illuminate again, and he did not answer, not because he wanted to punish her, but because he had nothing left to say that he hadn't already said, and he was very tired. She texted at 2009, "Thomas, please call me. This is not what you think it is." He read it twice and put the phone face down on Gerald's guest bed and lay in the dark until sometime before dawn, when he fell into an uneven sleep. The weeks that followed had the particular quality of a life experienced through glass, present but slightly removed, the sounds muffled. the edges blurred. He stayed at Gerald's for 2 weeks, then rented a furnished apartment on the east side of the city, the kind of place with white walls and generic light fixtures that reminded him of a hotel room. He found this oddly comforting. It had no expectations. Angela sent emails that were carefully written, the prose of someone who had been deliberate about every word. She was not, she explained, having an affair. She had never been physically unfaithful. Victor was a colleague and a friend, and she understood that Thomas had felt excluded, and she was sorry for that, and she wanted them to go to couples counseling. She used the word reconciliation 3 times across their correspondence, always with the tone of a term she'd looked up and decided was appropriate. Thomas read these emails with the attention he might give to a report he was fact-checking. Her version was not untrue. That was the thing that made it most difficult. She had not lied in any technical sense. She had simply not prioritized the right truths, and for long enough that the truths had rearranged themselves into something irreparable. He told her he would think about counseling. He continued thinking about it for 6 weeks without responding further. Angela, from what he understood through mutual acquaintances, their friend Diane occasionally provided information without meaning to, was having a hard winter. She had gone to dinner with Victor twice after the Meridian party, which told Thomas something about how firmly she'd held to her own interpretation of events. Then, apparently, she had stopped. The dinners ceased. Whether out of guilt or genuine recalibration, he didn't know. Victor's name stopped appearing in any of the communications she sent Thomas. What appeared in those communications instead was something Thomas recognized, because he knew Angela and he knew the particular signature of her self-examination. She began asking questions rather than making statements. Did you feel like I stopped paying attention to you? When did this start? Because I've been trying to understand when this started, the emails acquired the texture of someone doing excavation work without being fully certain what they were hoping to find. He answered some of these questions honestly and briefly. He did not say, I think you stopped turning toward me somewhere around the 3rd year, and I didn't say anything because I didn't know how to say it without sounding like a man who needed too much. He didn't say it because he wasn't sure it was entirely fair, and because blame distributed with too much precision begins to look like its own kind of evasion. He thought, in the long evenings in the white-walled apartment, about his own share of the collapse. He was not a man who performed introspection easily. He found it uncomfortable the way some people find physical therapy uncomfortable, the working of something that has been held stiff for too long. But the evenings were quiet, and there was nothing else to do with the time, so he let himself do it. He thought about the mornings he had left without waking her, about the years of dinners that were pleasant and impersonal, about the way he had always assumed that presence constituted intimacy, that simply being there was sufficient evidence of love. He thought about all the evenings Angela had set the table and poured 2 glasses of water and waited, and how he had arrived at the table already somewhere else in his head, already in tomorrow's calculations, and how she must have learned over years to stop expecting him to arrive fully. He did not excuse what she had done, the turning away, the new brightness that was not for him. But he held it alongside his own failures, with something like accuracy. And accuracy, he was learning, was not the same as comfort. In March, he agreed to 1 session with a counselor, not because he believed it would restore the marriage, because he wanted to understand the shape of what had happened before he put it entirely behind him. The counselor, a patient woman named Dr. Cuz, Okonkwo, had a gift for asking questions that sounded simple until you tried to answer them. She asked Thomas what he had needed from Angela that he hadn't asked for. He sat with this for almost a full minute. Then he said, to feel like I was interesting to her. It was the most honest thing he had said aloud in months. He was surprised to find that it did not make him feel smaller to say it. They met in April, at Angela's suggestion. A coffee place on Whitmore Street, the kind of unassuming place that has no sentimental significance to either party. Chosen, Thomas understood, precisely for that reason. Neither of them wanted a setting with history. She was already there when he arrived. She looked well, or she looked like someone who had worked at looking well, which was a different thing, and which Thomas noticed. She had ordered tea. She always drank tea when she was anxious, which she remembered the way you remember details about people you have spent years in close proximity to. Not with tenderness, exactly, but with the complicated accuracy of real knowing. Thank you for coming, she said. Of course, he said. There was a pause while he settled his coat and ordered coffee. Then they were sitting across from each other for the first time since the courtyard of the Meridian Hotel, and the particular quality of the silence between them, not hostile, not warm, but specific to them, to this, to what they had been and were no longer settled around them like weather. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Angela said. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "About Victor, about what it was, what I was." She stopped. Started again with more care. "I think I needed to feel like someone found me genuinely interesting. At work. As a person. And I let it take up more space than it should have. More space than us." Thomas looked at his coffee. "I'm not saying that explains it," she continued. "Or excuses it. I know," he said. Are you going to tell me what I should have done instead?" He thought about this. He thought about how easy it would be to give her the inventory. "You should have told me. You should have said you were lonely. You should have said I was disappearing on you. All of it true. All of it also incomplete." "No," he said. "I think you know what you should have done, and I think I know what I should have done. I don't think going over it helps either of us at this point." Angela nodded. She looked out the window for a moment at the ordinary April street. A woman with a stroller, a man in a green jacket consulting his phone, a dog pausing to investigate something at the base of a lamppost. Life proceeding as it does without reference to any particular grief. "I'm sorry," she said. She said it without the architecture of self-defense she'd sometimes used in the emails. No, but following it. No, however, no qualifying clause. Just a sentence, plain as a room with the furniture removed. "I know you are," Thomas said. "I'm sorry too." They sat with that for a while. "Is there any—" Angela began and then stopped, and he understood from the way she stopped that she had asked herself whether the question was useful and decided it wasn't. That small self-correction, the choosing not to ask, struck him as the most mature thing he had ever witnessed from her. It struck him also as something that had perhaps come a year or two too late. He did not say this. Some truths are accurate and still unkind, and Thomas was trying to be both accurate and kind, which he had discovered was the most difficult combination. "I think the divorce should be straightforward," he said. "I don't want things to be complicated." "Okay," Angela said. Her voice was steady. He respected her for it. They finished their drinks. They talked for a few more minutes about logistics, the apartment, a shared bank account, the particular mundane architecture of disentangling. At one point, she made a small attempt at humor about the faucet they'd never fixed, and Thomas laughed a little, because it was funny, and because 7 years had been real, even if they had ended, and he wasn't the kind of man who needed to pretend otherwise. When they stood to leave, Angela touched his arm, briefly, lightly, the way you touch something you are not going to pick up. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," he said. He walked to his car. He sat in it for a few minutes before turning the key, watching the ordinary April world through the windshield. He thought about a Sunday 3 years ago when they had spent the whole morning in bed reading, not even talking much, just reading in the same warm room, and he had felt, quietly, without drama, that this was enough. He had felt it and not said it. He was not sure, even now, that saying it would have changed what followed. He was not sure it wouldn't have. The not knowing was the thing he would carry. Not bitterness, not anger. Those had proven too heavy to maintain. And Thomas had always been practical about weight. Just the quiet, permanent question of what a different kind of honesty offered earlier might have built or saved. It was the kind of question that had no answer and yet never fully stopped being asked. He started the car. The street was bright and ordinary and entirely indifferent, and Thomas Elliot Carver drove through it into the rest of whatever his life was going to be. Not healed, not ruined, but altered, in the way that all real losses alter the people who survive them, quietly and permanently and without any particular ceremony.